Welcome back to the second part of the video about the cake pattern. So this is exactly where we left off. We've written the application with simple packages and with simple constructor injection. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to convert the whole thing into the cake pattern. We're basically not going to change any of the actual code of the terminal. We're basically only changing the wiring, how everything wires together. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to packages over here to the entities project, and we're going to create another folder. In fact, maybe let me create the folder everywhere. So we're going to have a folder called traits. All right, let me copy that. Traits. Okay, and it's going to be open. And over here, new folder, traits. And I want it to be open. Over here, new folder, traits. It's going to be open. And over here, new folder, it's going to be traits, it's going to be open. And over here, new folder, traits, and it's going to be open. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to traits, and we're going to create the entities file the same as before, entities.scala, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our previous entities, the one that use packages, right? We're going to copy that, we're going to put it over here. We're going to change the package to traits, right? And as of right now, it should already compile, but we're not done with it. Okay, so what we will do is we're going to wrap the entire thing into a trait called entities module, right? Like this. So this curly brace is going to be at the very bottom, right? And we're going to shift everything over here to the right, and we don't need this. All right, so now everything is inside of this trait, and it says there were 2 unchecked warnings. Rerun was unchecked for details. As I mentioned in the video about the traits versus packages, the cake pattern and advanced things with traits, they still have some sort of bugs. All right, let's see. If we go to our build file, build.spt, I'm not sure if it's going to work if I just say Scala C options. I'm not sure if I have to say in this build, but probably I have to. Colon equals hyphen unchecked, or just unchecked. Unchecked. Let's try that. Okay, so let's reload. All right. Need a sequence of strings. Oh, I have to say plus equals. Hold up. Reload. All right, it seems fine. Let's see if it, let's see if it compiles. All right, so now we actually see the message. It says the auto reference in this type test cannot be checked at runtime. If we remove the final over here, if these 2 case classes are not final, then we don't get this warning. So I guess that this actually is a bug. In fact, I googled that and I found a bug. So I'm just going to put it over here, and I'm going to put this link also down in the description, and you can look it up and you can see why this doesn't work. In our case, it doesn't really matter because the trait is the trait is sealed anyway. Oh no, the trait is not. Yeah, even though the trait is sealed, we still could extend these. But it's fine. We're not going to extend them anyway. Okay, so we can live with this. Okay, so now we have the trait entities module, right? And inside of it, we have everything that we had before. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to the application boundary, same as before. I'm going to go to the traits, new file. Actually, I want to have this one as scope. All right, so we're going to go over here. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call it application boundary.scala. Right, so over here we're going to say, actually, let me copy it first. Let me just copy it first, same as before. I'm going to just copy that over here, right? And now, even though it's already a trait, we're also going to surround it with a different trait. We're going to surround it with application boundary module, right? This is a cake pattern. Everything will be inside of traits, like this. I'm going to bring it in, like that. Right, and this shouldn't compile, I believe. Oh, it does. Oh, actually, it does for wrong reasons, right? It does because I did not change the name, right? So it's now traits, right? So now to do is not it's not a package level thing, right? So if you wanted to use it, we need to access this trait somehow, because now it's inside of the trait, right? So with the cake pattern, what is happening is that you have to declare your dependencies explicitly. Like in this case, you could extend, so your module could extend this other module, but I'm going to use self types. So I'm just going to say, okay, entities module, like this, right? So whenever we mix this in, we also have to mix in the entities module. Okay, let's do the persistence gateway now. New file, persistence gateway.scala, right? And we're going to go to the old one. Just going to copy that, paste it over here. You're going to have package traits, right? And we're going to surround this one as well as always. Going to surround this one with trait persistence gateway module. We don't have to call it the same, but it's, you know, it's easier. So I'm going to go down, do this, right? So the persistence layer, it has to create those entities, right? So it needs the same thing. It needs access to those entities, right? So it's going to say this entities module, like this. All right, now it works. The next thing is going to be the application core. Let's create it. Application core.scala. Okay, and let's move it over here. Let's go here. Let's copy paste the whole thing. Okay, let's go back here, paste it in. It's going to be in package traits. Okay, and we're going to surround it as before. We're going to call it application core module. This one is actually going to extend the entities module, right? And it's going to extend the application boundary module, right? Let's bring this down, all the way down. There we go. Move this thing to the right, like that. And even though it extends those things, it actually also needs the persistence gateway module, right? So that this compiles. Okay. Let's see if I did it right. I did it right. All right. So the next one is going to be the in-memory persistence gateway. So let's go over here. Let's create it over here. In-memory persistence gateway dot scala. It's over here now, right? So let me copy everything. Let me paste it over here, right? So we go to the top. Sorry, we go to the top, change the package to traits. We surround it with an in-memory persistence gateway module, which extends the persistence gateway module. No, not this one. Just the persistence gateway module, like this. Okay, like that. And this one goes down, all the way down. This is a very mechanical transformation, by the way, as you can see, right? It's everything is the same, right? And it also needs the entities module, right? Because the persistence gateway module says that it needs them, right? Over here we don't have them, so we have to still say that we need them. Okay, let's see if this compiles. Okay, compiles. The next one is the terminal user interface, right? So we're gonna go to traits over here, terminal user interface dot scala. All right, I'm gonna take everything over here, click over here, right? So let's go up. Oh, I didn't save it. Traits, like this. Let me save it. Okay. Right, so now nothing compiles. Okay, so in the terminal user interface, we're gonna surround the trait. We surround the class user interface with terminal user interface module, and this module is going to need the entities module because it will use the application boundary. Right? It needs the application boundary over here, which is why it needs the application boundary over here, which is why it needs the entities module, because the actually the application boundary module, hold up. Oh yeah, the application boundary needs the entities. Yeah, that's all good. Okay, so terminal, okay, so arrow to the right, and this thing has to go all the way down. I'm just gonna remove it. I'm gonna press Control and gonna put it over here. I'm gonna move everything one layer to the right, like this over here. All right, let's see. Cool. Everything compiles. Very mechanical transformation. Okay, so now we're in the to-do. I'm gonna create to-do app dot scala. Gonna go over here, copy paste the whole thing, and gonna paste it over here. Right, this is where it's gonna start getting a little bit interesting. So we're not just gonna extend the app. First of all, let's do traits. Okay, traits. Right, so we're not just gonna extend the app. In fact, let me think. Yeah, let's do it like this. Maybe we shouldn't. Let's do this first. Okay, so let's do val cake. Right, and we're gonna say this is a new application core module, which is this one. Sorry, this one, application core module, right? With in-memory persistence module. So right over here, we're selecting actually which ones we want, right? We could also select, you know, the SQL database, for example, right? And with the terminal user interface module, okay? And do we need that? In fact, you know what? It's actually going to make everything way too complicated. We could do it like this. In fact, we'll do it probably by the end of this video. But as of right now, I'm just going to mix the app with the whole cake together, right? So we're not going to say just extends app. We're going to say extends app with application core module and so on, right? So we're not going to have an instance of the cake, right? The to-do is going to be our entire cake, right? So we're just going to move this brace over here like this, right? Let me just fix the indentation like that. So we have an application with an application core with in-memory persistence module with terminal user interface, right? And let's see, because it might actually already run in-memory persistence. Hold up. What does it say? Not found type in-memory persistence module. Is there a typo? In-memory persistence module. My neighbors are killing someone again. Oh, it's called in-memory persistence gateway module. Interesting. Hold up. Over here. Like this. All right. Okay, so now it compiles and the whole thing works. Let's see. So if we run it, so now we can choose the packages or the traits. We already played with packages. Now we can choose the traits, and it's going to look exactly the same, right? You don't even see the difference. Everything is in the cake pattern now, but you don't even see the difference. You know, let's create one, some description, some deadline. Let's do 2018. The month is going to be, we already have, you know, let's do July. Let's days, I don't know, 4th of July. Yes, why not? 4th of July, 4 a.m. All right, show all. And there we go. So 2018, July 4 is going to be a Wednesday. That's cool. Okay. Actually, it was a Wednesday. Why did I say it will be? All right. So everything works. Cool. Cool. Okay. So let's go back to compiling again, and let's see what we did. Let's go through this a little bit, and then I'm going to show you like a little bit more different version of the cake pattern, right? So let's just compare things. So over here we had just a regular trait to do with, you know, with a few implementations, but over here with the traits, you know, everything is in the trait. Let's actually close the build file. We don't need. Okay. Let's compare the application boundary. It was just a regular trait with a bunch of functions. Now over here, it's also just a regular trait, but now it's surrounded with a module, and it has to explicitly define the dependency. Application core, same thing. It used to be just a class. Now it's a class inside of a trait, which extends the entities module, which extends the application boundary module, which has a explicit dependency on the persistence gateway module. Persistence gateway used to be just a trait. Now it's a trait inside of a module trait. let's look at the terminal. Simple class. Why is it sorted like this? I want to sort it like this. Okay, now this terminal. So okay, again, we had a terminal, regular class. Now we have it here, regular class, but now it's inside of a trait with explicit dependencies. Persistence gateway, simple object, extends a simple trait. Now it's an object that extends a simple trait, but everything is inside of this trait. The to-do app used to be just a regular app, and over here is some complicated thing, right? Okay, so this is the sort of the version 0 of the cake pattern. The thing is that if you look closely, that over here, this is the point where the dependency injection is happening. This is the point where you say that you want the in-memory persistence gateway module and not the SQL persistence gateway module, right? And not the Mongo persistence gateway module. But you have to say it twice. So you say it over here. Because because you mix this in, this thing is now all of a sudden in scope. But you're sort of doing it twice, right? You specify it over here. There is a way to have to not be enforced to do this as well. And this is what we're gonna do now. This is how we're gonna do it. We're gonna remove this line, right? And now it's gonna say persistence gateway cannot be found, right? So in order to make it found, we're gonna go to the application core, right, where we define what it means, you know, to have a persistence gateway, right, over here. And over here we're going to say that it also needs a def here, right? We're gonna make it protected def, but it doesn't really matter. It also needs a def called persistence gateway, right? And it has to be of the type persistence gateway, this one, right? Therefore it will be in scope later, right? So the only place where it doesn't compile is the actual to-do app. It's going to say object creation impossible, so it's method persistence gateway in trait persistence gateway module of type trait to-do app is not defined, right? So now we have to define it, right? We just removed it, but now we have to define it. So this is where it's declared, and where it's defined is going to be over here, right? So over here we're going to say override def, it's actually a protected def, persistence gateway of type persistence gateway equals in-memory persistence gateway. And now the whole cake is being assembled sort of automatically. I mean, this part of the cake. So if we go over here, right, there's still some persistence gateway in scope. Over here we still sort of don't see which one, right? But over here we do. Okay, and also because we're overriding a def, there's also a way to override a def with an object right away. So in fact we can merge these two lines, right? So let me how are we going to do this? Let me comment out this, let me comment out that, right? And now over here I can say override protected. Now instead of def I'm going to say object. I'm going to have to still call it persistence gateway. Instead of calling persistence gateway, I'm going to say extends persistence gateway, and like this, right? So what I just wrote is basically exactly the same code as these two lines. I'm overriding a def with an object on the fly. So this name basically doesn't exist anymore, right? This one still does, but this one does not. There is no need for it. Let me remove that. Okay, and now we're just gonna keep going like this. So we're gonna go to our application core over here, and now we're gonna do the same thing with the application core. Let's just remove this line. Right now things are not gonna compile, right? So we need the application boundary, and the application boundary is defined well in the application boundary, right? So if we go to application boundary for the traits over here, it doesn't just define the trait, it also defines the application boundary like this, application boundary. Okay, so now everything's going to compile until the to-do app, because inside of the to-do it's going to say, hey, you said that you need an application boundary, but you haven't actually defined it, right? Well, where is it going to be defined? It's going to be defined in the application core, right? In the application core, we're going to do the same trick over here, right? This is the wrong one. This is the one, right? The application core, we don't actually need to inject it, right? We don't need to inject it because persistence gateway is going to be flying around in scope because of this, right? So all we need to do is instead of, we just need to remove this. We need to change this to final override object, and we can't call it application core anymore. We have to call it application boundary, application boundary, right? And I believe this should work. It does work. In fact, I believe when I did the same thing for the persistence gateway, I forgot the final. Let me see. Yeah, let's have a final here, right? Because, you know, this is how it works, because otherwise it can be overridden again. Okay, so let's keep going. The pattern, the same thing with the pattern. Why do we need it over here? We should just be able, oh no, actually the pattern is going to stay here, but we don't want to, but the terminal user interface should not be here. And let's just remove it like this, right? So we still need the pattern. We'll still need the pattern, but it's going to be an override. It's going to be an override. We can override the def with a val. It's going to be an override, and it's going to be defined in the terminal user interface, right? Over here. Over here, we're going to say, hey, we need a pattern, right? We need a pattern, which is a date time formatter, right? And this whole class is just going to become an object. It's just going to become an object called user interface. Now I'm going to call it user interface because the variable that we're using over here is called user interface, right? So I'm just going to call it object user interface, right? And we can just remove this whole constructor like this, right? So now the whole cake is assembled. The whole cake is assembled. We don't use the constructors for dependency injection. We're actually using the cake pattern for the dependency injection. And I know that this is, like, you know, sort of a bit of too fast, right? But again, I uploaded it to GitHub. You can look at it at your own pace, right? So basically the cake pattern, like this version of the cake pattern, allows you to have your dependencies sort of floating in scope automatically, right? So if I wanted to use a Mongo database, for example, I would just need to replace this one line, right? This one line would say with SQL persistence gateway module, or with Mongo persistence gateway module, or with, you know, I don't know, it doesn't even have to be a database, it can be anything you want, okay? Right, so this was the second version of the cake pattern. I'm also going to show you the third one and the fourth one, so to say. So the third one is you can have it's basically the thing that I tried to do before. So instead of mixing it into the application, this is going to be an experiment, by the way. So we're just going to have a cake over here, right? I'm going to say equals, and by the way, the type of the cake. Let's also define the type. The type. Why does it jump like this? It's crazy. Okay, so the type is going to be cake, right? And this is going to be the application boundary module with persistence gateway module with user interface module. Is this how we called it? Is this how we called it? No, there is no user interface module. Let's go here. There's only terminal user. Yeah, we didn't abstract it over that. So we're just going to do this. Okay, so this is the cake. So now we're going to create an instance of the cake by saying new, and in fact, I'm just going to put new over here. I'm going to cut it out like these things, like that. Cut it out, put them over here, right? So this is actually what I advise you to do when you're dealing with a cake pattern. You know, don't assemble the whole thing into one cake pattern. Just assemble a lot of tiny, small pastries, right? So now we could go over here and say, and okay, this pattern has to be inside. The pattern has to be inside, like this. Right. So this is like this assembled cake, okay? and I'm just assuming that it compiles, right? So if you wanted to gain access to the application boundary, we would have to say cake dot, right? Because now it's inside of the cake. I'm not going to do that over here, but I'm just going to import the cake. I'm just going to import the cake, right? Let's see if this compiles. It should actually. To do data, blah blah blah. Okay, so just importing the cake is not enough. We actually don't have access to this thing outside of the cake, right? So we can't do this, I believe. Yeah, we have to do this thing inside of the cake. We basically have to do everything inside of the cake, right? And now, I mean, now there's no need to import the cake, so now we can just do cake.userinterface.run. Okay, persistence gateway module, not found type. Is there a typo? I'm not sure. Hold on, it has to be here. Oh yeah, there's no S over here, right? Okay, so now it compiles, and now it should work exactly the same. Run traits show all. Yeah, if show all works, then everything else works as well. Okay, compile. Right, so if you do this, first of all, the compiler hates the cake pattern. It takes forever to compile. So if you do this, then you have at least, you know, a lot of tiny pastries, right? By the way, you don't need to specify the type over here, right? I just did it for clarification. I think you can just do this. Yeah, you can just do this. I just wanted to show you that, you know, how abstract this whole thing is, right? Because this is the boundary we implemented with the core. This is the persistent gateway module we implemented with the in-memory one. This is the terminal user interface module. Okay, we didn't actually abstract over this one. Okay, we didn't abstract over this one because if you were to build, for example, a website, the interface would be slightly different. Not because it can't be the same, it's just because it's probably a better user experience if we don't force, for example, the website to have methods like, you know, show all, right? Like what is it going to do with show all? I mean, it's probably going to show all everything by default anyway. Or here, these two, for example, there's probably going to be a form where you fill out, you know, description and the headline, and you will be able to update both at the same time, right? Our application core allows you to update both to update both at the same time, but the terminal does not, right? So if we abstracted over that, we would force our website to have a less beautiful interface, probably, right? Okay, so let's go back here. So now that we have like a bunch of cakes, right? You can separate. You can have like a cake for every use case of your application, right? So for example, this thing could grow, right? And then in the future it would, for example, let's say we wanted to snooze to-dos, right? We wouldn't need to have it inside of this cake. We could assemble a slightly different cake, for example, for some reason. This is actually a bad example, I'm thinking. But if this was like a platform, right, and you didn't have only, you know, if this was not just a to-do application, it was a to-do application and a mail application, right? So the mail would be a separate cake, right? So this would be called like to-do cake. This would be called the mail cake, right? You would run them separately. They would have like their own life cycles and whatnot. Okay, right. The last thing that I'm going to show you about the cake pattern is a really cool thing, because now we're dealing with traits and not with packages. Packages are sort of like a primitive way to separate namespaces, right? Traits are actually full-blown objects. So remember this part where we say that the ID is a string, and then when it actually comes to the persistence layer, we say, okay, now it's an integer because we're using an in-memory thing, or because we're using SQL database. If you were to use, for example, Mongo, we would use object IDs. There is a way to abstract over that, and I'm going to show you this. Okay, first of all, we don't really need to, but let me actually revert this thing to what it was before, because I actually, you know, it actually looks kind of more beautiful. I actually prefer it like this, right? It requires less code like this. Okay, so everything's reversed, everything compiles. Okay, so we're gonna go to our entities over here, right? And we're gonna abstract over the type. Right? So we're going to have our entities, and we're going to say there has to be, in this entire cake, there has to be a type called ID. It's going to be a similar thing to the f-bounded polymorphism, but a bit less complicated, because all we're saying here is that there has to be an ID, right? So if I try to compile it now, the to-do app shouldn't compile. Okay, to-do app compiles because it's an abstract, it's a complicated thing. Right? Basically, ideally, it would say, hey, it's not implemented. All right, so if we had a def blah over here, it shouldn't compile because it should say, hey, dev apply is not implemented. Even though we're not using it, it say, hey, it's not defined, right? The similar thing should happen for the type, but it doesn't. Okay, so we're gonna have a type ID, and we're gonna have a function called create ID from string, right? We're gonna pass in an input, and it's going to be a string, but it's going to actually try to create an ID out of it, right? So now if I'm gonna compile, okay. Now it's actually say object creation is impossible because the this tiny function is not defined. So actually let me not do this. Let's have it. Fine. Let's have it. Okay. So now over here, instead of the ID string, we can say we're going to use this ID type, whatever it is, right? And we have to keep going through the whole cake and replace it as well. So in memory persistence gateway 23, in memory persistence gateway line 23 over here, we're saying here next ID dot to string. We don't need to convert it back to string, right? Because next ID is already the type that we need if we do this over here, right? If we do this over here, right? If we go, in fact, this can it be a protective type? It doesn't need to be a protective type. Okay, so over here, we're going to say override type ID, right? And we're going to say that the type ID is an integer, right? And we're also going to say override this other one. How did I call it? This one over here, right? In fact, let's do final override in both of them. Final override. Oops, I forgot the override. So what we're going to have over here is we're going to say Scala util try input to int to option, like this. Okay, the next thing is line 49. Okay, so everywhere where we're dealing with IDs, it has to be ID now. This has to be an ID. Okay, I need to change the same thing in the persistence gateway over here. So this needs to be an ID. In the application core, application boundary, everything that has to do with IDs, right? So this has to be an ID. In the application core, the same thing. ID. Application boundary 9, not found type ID. Right, that's because I went to the wrong one. I went to the one in packages. Okay, application core. Okay, let's fix this one. Okay, application boundary. Okay, let's go over here. Same trick. ID. Application core. ID. Right? Okay, so now we're at the terminal user interface, line 142. Terminal user interface, line 142. Okay, read one by ID. This has to be an ID. Who calls that? Okay, with ID prompt. So with ID prompt, whoops, has to deal with IDs, right? So now you see why I called it create ID from string, because I knew that I would call it like this, right? So create ID from string is now in the entire cake, so I can just remove this one and it will actually validate it properly. Okay, not found type ID. Did I fix the wrong one again? Yes, I did. Let's go back. Right, I fixed the wrong one again. Okay, with ID prompt, that's going to be an ID. Read one is ID, that's fine. Now we can just remove this one. Whoops. And this one. Right, okay. Okay, now the entire application works. It works exactly the same way, but it's a little bit more beautiful, right? So if you run it, let me show you the difference. If we run the packages app, for example, over here, right? And I'm gonna search by ID, SID, okay? So over here, it would only tell me that the ID is invalid if my ID, which is a string, if it contains spaces or if it was an empty line or whatever, right? Because we were trying to figure out if it's valid or not in the delivery layer, right? And not in the persistence layer. The persistence layer is actually the one that knows more about the IDs. It knows more if it's actually valid or not, right? So only if I type in something like this, it's going to think that it's a valid ID. Sure, it's going to say that none of the to-dos are found, but it's say that it's going to say that, but it's going to think that the ID is valid, right? So if I go search again, right? But if I do a space over here, because of the way we implement it, it's going to say that it's not a valid ID. In the traits one, it actually will have a proper validation, right? So if I run again, but if I run the one with the traits, right? If I search by ID, so now if I do something like this, it won't be able to convert into an integer, right? This conversion, this create ID from string, is now in the persistence layer, right? It's implemented there now. Because it's going to fail, it's going to say that this is not a valid ID, which is much better, much safer. Also, by the way, notice that thing that if we did not have this create ID from string thing, it will be impossible to generate this type from here, right? Because over here, okay, we know that the type ID exists, right? But we don't know how to convert a string into that type. So if we wanted to do that, then not the persistence layer would specify that the type has to be an int. It has to be, first of all, somewhere more higher in the cake, right? For example, I don't know, in the application core or in the main. And then secondly, over here, we would need to do, toInt, right? Because probably in the delivery, right? So probably in the delivery, we would need to specify what it is. In fact, what the hell? Let's try it. Let's go to the terminal user interface and let's try to create this type. So let's not call create ID from string. Let's pretend like it doesn't exist, right? Let's pretend like we know that it's an integer, right? First of all, there's no way to know that it's an integer, but let's do it. Let's do it toInt, right? And now let's do the same thing, Scala util try, let's convert it to an integer. Whoops. To integer, right? To option. Right, and now let's use this instead, right? So now let's use this thing, and let's do it like that. Right? Let's see what happens. Look, it's going to say found id.type was underline type int, but I require the terminal user interface module this ID. So even though you know that the ID is an integer because you implemented the in-memory persistence gateway, the compiler doesn't know that this is the same type. So you need to cheat. You need to say as instance of ID. Oh, I'm sorry, I put it in the wrong one. We have to do it over here, because this is actually an option of ID, like this, right? So only now it works. Similarly, if you knew in the terminal, in the terminal user interface that it's actually an integer, you would have to do the same, the other thing over there, right? In the persistence gateway, right? So if we cut this out from here, right, and if we specify it in the user interface instead, somewhere at the very top over here, right? Gonna do it like this, right? So it's over here. So now it can't actually convert this to ID like this. So we have to go here and we have to say as instance of ID, right? Like this. And the same thing in line 27. Right? But that's basically cheating, and also this is very, very error prone, right? But it's gonna work, right? So we can now run the traits app, and we're gonna what should we do? Let's just show all. Right, it works. Let's search by ID. Let's do 1. That works. Let's search by ID 25. It works. Let's search by ID something wrong. It's not a valid ID, right? So it works. but it's much better to do it, you know, the way that I showed you before, because you don't have those weird cuts. So this is the cake pattern. I'm gonna revert this weird essence of ID stuff, and I'm gonna upload it to GitHub. Also, I'm gonna leave a link down in the description to a very interesting presentation about the cake pattern and about using traits as modules done by Daniel Spivak, which is like 5 or 6 years ago. It's really beautiful. Watch it. It's really great. All right. So as I said, check this out at your own pace on GitHub. I'm gonna leave the link down in the description. Like this video if you did. Subscribe if you want to improve the developer inside you, and most importantly, take care.